Welcome to the quadratic formula, what it is, when it is used, and how to use it. Let's consider this equation. X squared plus 5x plus 2 equals 0. This is a quadratic equation. We can tell because the largest exponent is 2. There are several methods that we have learned to solve a quadratic equation. Factoring is the easiest method, so we should always start with it first. If this equation is factorable, then we will be able to find two numbers that multiply to equal 2 and add to equal 5. Upon reflection, I recognize that there aren't two numbers that multiply to equal 2 and add to equal 5. So this equation is not factorable. Let's consider another method by completing the square. This equation has an odd coefficient in its middle term, the 5. That will make it a little difficult to complete the square to solve this equation. So let's try another method. How about taking square roots? Since this equation has that middle term, the 5x, we cannot take a square root. So what can we do? We can use the quadratic formula. It is derived from Pythagorean's theorem, and it works for any quadratic equation, which means we will be able to use it anytime we cannot use some of those other methods. The quadratic formula is x equals the opposite of b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a. Now, how are we going to learn such a complicated formula that we are going to need to use quite often? Well, how about a song? X equals opposite of b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a. X equals opposite of b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a. X equals opposite of b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a. Now that we have learned the quadratic formula, let's see how to apply it. Let's look at the equation we were looking at just a couple of minutes ago. X squared plus 5x plus 2 equals 0. And let's use the quadratic formula to solve it. Now, before you can use the quadratic formula, you have to make sure your equation is in standard form, which means all of the terms are on the left in decreasing order by exponent, and on the right, the equation equals 0. Once you have it in standard form, you're going to determine what your A, your B, and your C are so that you can substitute them into the formula. A, recall, is the coefficient of the x squared term, so that is 1. B is the coefficient of your linear term, so that is 5. And C is your constant, so that equals 2. Our formula again is x equals the opposite of b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a. So if we substitute in our values from this equation, we will have the opposite of 5. And since 5 is already positive, the opposite will be negative 5. Plus or minus the square root of b squared, which is 25, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is 2, all divided by 2 times 1. Simplifying, we have negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 25 minus 8, all divided by 2, which is negative 5 plus or minus the square root of 17 divided by 2. And at this point, you need to determine what your teacher wants you to do and as far as what kind of form you should leave your solutions. This is our two solutions in exact form, -5 plus the square root of 17 over 2, and -5 minus the square root of 17 over 2. But if you're asked to approximate these values instead, then you will need to use your calculator. And you will get negative 0.44 and negative 4.56. I hope you have enjoyed our video and will be walking around singing the quadratic formula in your head so that you will never forget.